Today I want to talk about grayling. They're a fish I've caught in reasonable numbers over many decades. I first caught them in 1970, which was the year I started to fish the Dorset Froome. I lived on the outskirts of Wareham, so the Froome wasn't far away. And once I got access to the river above Wareham on the non-tidal bits, I started to get one or two grayling. I wasn't very experienced then as an angler. I was only 13, but I discovered that I could trot down the river. Back then the river would open for coarse fishing on the salmon and sea trout fishing beats on the 1st of October. There would be a match the first Sunday in October, and then we pleasure fished from then until the end of February. And in those early days, people often took grayling to eat. They were very much a bycatch. We would catch mostly dace, occasionally quite good roach, the odd gudgeon, and obviously out of season trout and sea trout. But it was more often that someone would get a good mixed catch of anything from 5 to 15 or 20 pounds, and there would be one or two grayling. And a really big grayling back then was £2 in the Froome in that part. That was an absolute monster. The biggest ones I caught in those early days, when I was about 16 I suppose, were around about £1.50. They were my first big ones. I caught ones just over £1 before then, but about £1.50 was as big as they went. As the years went by, very occasionally we would catch one further downstream, actually in Wareham, down in the town. I caught them off the quay there, one or two off the towpath. Occasionally would get one on Eastmoor, which was the stretch between where is now Wareham Bypass and Wareham. And £2 were still monsters, and then things started to change in the 90s. Bigger fish started to show. Some people got access to waters just below Dorchester, private trout fishing waters, and some of these were netted out from a place called West Stafford and placed into a little still water called Loudsmill. This was probably about 1987 or 8, and about 3 dozen monsters were put in there, and Martin Hooper actually caught one at 312, which became a new British record. The British record at that time was about 310 from the Allen at Wimborne, of all places, from the mill as you go out of the town. And so the knowledge that huge grayling were in the Froome became more widespread. But the club stretches that people had access to were at Wool, Dorchester and District Angling Society had a stretch there, and Wareham had a long stretch from Holmbridge down to below the Swanage Railway, and that was the water I fished. I fished the Wareham water, like I say, down on the towpath. I did catch a £2 from Loudsmill. The fish weren't there very long. They were stocked one autumn. The place was hammered. The record, Martin Hooper caught his record, and by the new year there weren't, or by early in the next year there weren't that many left. And once the summer hot temperatures came, it was just a small pond really. The grayling soon perished, and that was pretty much the end of that. It had been a trout fishery, and they just put these grayling in, hoping that they would survive, but just not enough oxygen in the summer. So I caught my first £2 at Loudsmill, but it always felt like a bit of an artificial personal best to me. And then in the 90s I finally caught a £2, but it was on the towpath at Wareham, down below the town, and that one counted. It was still only bang on £2. And then over the years I picked up the odd ones over £2 at Holmbridge and further downstream, and got up to about £2.10. And like I say, I try and fish for grayling every winter, have 2 or 3 or 4 sessions, see if I can catch some. I'm not that bothered. I don't get excited about having to catch them or having to catch big ones. They can fight very hard. Sometimes they don't. They just sort of wallow around and you can get them out fairly easily. They're not hard to catch. If they're unpressured, they're a fish that they really thrive on neglect. So the waters that were the trout waters up at places like West Stafford and up further, when people first were able to gain access to them, they caught enormous grayling. The British record comes from the Froome, and I think there's been more than one record from the Froome, over £4, and there were ones well over £3 caught up there, and there have been £3-pounders down in this sort of Holme Bridge area as well, and possibly at Wool as well. But once people hammer them, it doesn't take much handling and they just don't survive. People keep them out of the water far too long. They keel over, they put them back. Oh, it swam off all right, and it's gone down, and it's basically turned upside the wrong way round on the bottom, facing the wrong way, can't breathe properly, and it drowns. It sounds stupid that fish drowns, but they do drown, and this is why they thrive on neglect. So if you do catch one, rest it in the landing net. If you must weigh it, and don't bother weighing one to a pound for God's sake, and just put it back. You don't need to photograph it. I've seen videos even this season with people holding up a fish and they're talking for 40 seconds. For God's sake, 5 seconds. That's all you need, 5 seconds. And I'll show a trick with a very short bit of video, and I'll make it last a lot longer than the actual clip's only about 1.5 seconds. I can make it last a lot longer than that through a bit of video trickery. So you don't need to hold it that long. You can do stuff and talk over it, and that is fine. Anyway, last season I went up and fished a stretch of the Froome, private stretch, and I caught grayling to 112. I had about 10, which was quite promising. Others over a pound. Good fish, some little ones. And this is important to realise with grayling. They can be quite prolific. They grow very fast. You can catch ones that are quite small, and they're this season's fish pretty much. The following year they can be 6 and 8 ounces, 10 ounces. Following year a pound. Following year a £1.5, £1.10, £1.12. Following year over £2, and any that survive another year or so, they can be over £3. They really do grow quickly, and I discovered over a decade, about 15 years ago, I caught one, and I was float fishing, and this is why I say please don't feed a fish for grayling. I have done it. The chances are you will deep hook them, you'll kill the grayling. They just sit on the bottom, they hoover up the maggots, they swallow it straight down, and you've deep hooked it before you've had a chance to hit the bite. It's just happened. People say, oh, I've seen a video not long ago where someone was chucking a little feeder here, there. Oh, I'm pulling out grayling left, right and centre. Yeah. Oh, I'm having to use a disgorger a lot. Yep. That's because they're all right down the throat. Don't feed a fish for them. But this was float fishing, and it still got it right down its throat, and it was deep hooked, and it didn't survive. I arrested it. I tried to get it to recover. It was bleeding badly, and so I took it home and I ate it, which is, it seems stupid to throw a dead fish back that's edible. So I did take it home many years ago. And when I gutted it, I wanted to see what its stomach contents were. And although it had been taking my maggots, so it had some maggots in there were hundreds, and I mean hundreds, of tiny little caddises. I'll try and find a picture of some of these to show you what they're like. They're about 1 centimetre long, about 2.5 millimetres, 3 millimetres thick, tapered, a very dark green, and there must be billions in the Froome. And this grayling had several hundred of these little caddis. So although the river doesn't look that rich in food, it is. And these grayling feed, even though this was the middle of winter, this was January, they are feeding really hard. They are a cold water fish. They feed even when there's ice on the water. Even on a chalk stream you can get ice in the edges. Hardest of frost, -8, -10. They may feed better when there's a tinge in the water and it's a bit warmer, rather than gin clear and very cold, but they will feed when it's very, very cold. So these grayling take advantage of this natural food to grow quickly, and obviously when you create an artificial hatch of feeding maggots, they will feed on them. People have said about sweet corn, and that there's a debate on sweet corn with grayling, whether they can't digest it properly. The stuff's not very digestible anyway. When we eat it, we don't digest it properly either, and it can sort of clag up the grayling. So if you want to use sweet corn, probably best to just use it as a hook bait rather than feeding it at all. Just put it as and grayling have got fantastic eyesight. They'll spot it and they'll decide to eat it or not. One of the things about a grayling rise, they come off the bottom in 5 or 6 foot of water if it's really clear, to hit an emerging fly on the top, and they come up very, very fast, and they have phenomenal eyesight, whereas a brown trout would sit not very far below the surface to come up just a short distance, but the grayling's eyesight is incredible. So back to this season, I decided to have a couple of goes on the Froome, float fishing with an Avon float taking about 6 BB, 2 maggots on an 18, and let's see how I got on. Now, I said I wanted a 2-pounder, and I haven't caught a 2-pound grayling for probably a decade, because like I said, I haven't really fished for them. I had one of 114 out of the Stour last couple of seasons ago. I had one of 112 last year on the Froome. What I didn't expect was to get set up, cast in, and on the count of 10 the float went under, and this is the fish that I got. And there's my 2-pounder, 2 pound 4 ounces. A bit later I got some more, and we'll see these in a minute. And it's really good to see these grayling showing on the Froome. They do come and go over the years because of this fast growth. They can hit the top and then die out, and you think, people say, oh, there's no grayling, and you can have a year when it almost seems barren of grayling, and then 3 or 4 years go by and perhaps people stop fishing it as well. It's almost like the river is given a rest, and then suddenly you're catching them again, and they've had a good spawning year. There's always some left there, and grayling that spawn on the quiet stretches that don't get fished, the small ones will drop down river to fill the barren, the stretches where there aren't the fish, take over that empty niche where there's lots of food and not many fish. And so never write off a river like the Froome. Whether it's as pure as it should be, I don't know, with all the general fuss about rivers being pure, but it does seem fairly clean at the moment. And I hope you've enjoyed this little bit about grayling. They're not my favourite fish, but they're a fish that I would miss if they were ever gone. I do like to catch a few every season, even if it's only a dozen or so for the full season. They're good fun, they are easy to catch, just got to find the right place and fish for them. Until next time, it's goodbye for now.